Record. Hey, welcome everybody to our co-elevation call. I was about to say I'm John Berghoff, but I figure if you are watching this live or recorded, hopefully you know that by now. It's really good to be here with all of you, our Leaf leaders. I'm keep playing with, what do we call ourselves? Leaf leaders. I found was a little easier to say than leaf or something. So hey, it's good to be here. We're gonna kick things off in just a second. I'm probably going to mute most of you out. Mute all. There we go. Mute all. There we go. And I'm really looking forward to today's call. I hope you are. Some of you have no idea who I'm coaching or what I'm coaching them on, but those of you who are here, great. And if we get through the planned coaching and any of you have things you want to bring into the conversation and we've got time, happy to just continue to have the conversation. Before we jump in and just to cue you up, Jeremy and Sara, we're going to start. By the way, Jeremy is also Brotha James. Any of you who don't know, Brotha James is Jeremy or Jim or Jimmy Jim. Jeremy and Sara, before we start with yours, and then we're going to go to Deanna. Is there another? Yeah. So before we do that, I want to give all of you just a couple of updates that are relevant at different levels to this group. So first of all, we just finished our Best Year Ever Blueprint event, and we had 17 Leaf leaders who were there at the event. Many of you were there. I just want to thank all of you who were there because I know that by being there, you're the kind of folks who your energy and your contribution makes a tangible difference. It was an incredible event, and Appreciative Inquiry played a small role in the event. But let's not forget that Leaf is, it's one part of it is about understanding appreciative inquiry. The other part of it is about bringing in experiential facilitation. And the Best Year Ever event is all about how do we create an experiential environment that really lifts up a community. I'm not going to go deeply into a debrief of that event right now. We're probably going to do within the Leaf community a full unpacking of what happened at that event. I'll share with all of you a perspective that I'm not going to share with other communities because it's just not as relevant to them. But I will say this, just to encapsulate, if there was one core central learning from that event, and for those of you that weren't there, we had about 400 people from 16, 17 different countries. And on a number of levels, for me personally, it was one of the most powerful expressions of community. And that's a word that gets used a lot. I use it a lot. And I've come to realize that I want to be careful about using that word because what I saw in San Diego was a depth of connectedness that was much deeper than any other large group event that I've had any role in. And so I like to ask the question, why? How did that happen? What led to that? And I think it's a number of factors. And again, I'm going to kind of fully unpack that on a future debrief just within this community. A few of you noticed I had to get a podcast out today for the Achieve Your Goals. We have 400,000 people that every Wednesday they want a podcast. And I woke up this morning and realized we didn't have anything in queue. So I stood in front of the computer and I just rambled about the event. And you might have an interest in hearing some of those ramblings where I gave a lot of shout outs to everyone who contributed to that event and also acknowledged the idea of leading with a community, one of the things I tried to point out is that leading a community is very different than a lot of traditional images of leading in general. And so that event to me gave me some really visible proof, evidence, and a very viscerally tangible outcome in how that community felt being together. And I'll finish by pointing out results, because results are really important. And number one, we not only had people saying, and these are anecdotal results, although through surveys we can measure how many people are saying it, and on a scale of 1 to 5, how loudly are they saying it. And in the survey, we could share it with all of you. I mean, people are, the event wasn't perfect, and that's an important learning too. There's a lot of things about it that I wasn't happy with, but the overall expression was powerful. And 95% of the people either bought tickets to come back next year, or on the survey said they're absolutely coming back. Doesn't mean all of them actually end up coming back, but that real-time data is cool. That event serves as a fundraiser. We raised, our goal every year is 100 grand. We raised $230,000 plus. And this is an event where people showed up to work on themselves. They didn't show up to donate money. And so I got a whole bunch of thoughts about that and the power of that. And then our Quantum Leap Mastermind community, the most number of people we've ever had enroll or apply for that is usually in the 30 to 40 range. And we had 68 people apply this year, but that's with no more people at the event, not that many, proportionately more than prior years. And then our Leaf certification. We had 55 people express interest. Right off the bat, I know half of them probably aren't great prospects for it, but we've already filled half of the next class in about the last 3 days, just following up with people. We're on pace right now to have somewhere between 60 and 80 legitimate candidates apply for Leaf for 25 or so spots. So I'm sharing this because it's really easy to get caught up in the feeling of a positive environment and the power of creating community. But I don't want us to miss that when that's happening and it's contributing to tangible business results, a tangible financial impact for a social cause, a tangible growth for our Leaf business. Because I'm going to tell you as a group, I don't know how much I'll talk about this with other communities. I haven't thought about it. But I had a lot of insecurity, and Hal did too. We had a lot of concern and fear that coming into this event, we had a feeling good things were going to happen. But we also knew that what that meant was if we're enrolling people in QLM and we're not enrolling them there, but inviting them to eventually enroll in Leaf, and we're raising money, there's a point at which that starts to cannibalize itself. And so one of our concerns was, how much is one of these going to actually take away from the other? And it was the opposite of all of our fears. And that every single thing that we had to offer, which was only really those three things, was expanded. The whole pie, every pie got bigger, the whole pie got bigger, way more than we ever could have hoped for. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, to not lose sight that for some of you, this matters more than it does for others. For me personally, as an entrepreneur, I love leading groups. I love creating community. And I love when the results and the performance prove out that all these things we believe in are actually the best way to go about creating the biggest possible impact through every measure. So just wanted to point that out. I couldn't be more pumped with how that went. And thanks for letting me give you this little micro debrief on what unfolded at that event. It was cool. It was cool. That was a long way of trying to convince those of you who weren't there to be there next year to see what happens. Thank you for the round of applause that I couldn't hear, but I could see. So that also bought a little time for our first couple of folks to be ready for me to give them whatever guidance I can, and not just, I'll take the lead on it, but anyone else can chime in with questions or ideas. So we're going to start with Jeremy and Sarah. And Jer and Sarah, I don't know, you can unmute yourselves there if you want. But I think we've got at least one event we're talking about with the yoga community in Traverse City. And then Sarah, you and I talked, if we want, we can also talk about how to bring Leaf philosophy into the TED event that you curate and lead in Traverse City, which, whether we get to both of those or not, I think both of these there's lots of application that everybody could learn from. So excited to talk about it. So Jer or Sarah, I don't know if you have, either one of you wants to kick off just giving a little background on the yoga studio community. Tell us a little bit about that.
Great. So do you have the agenda?
I have it in front of me, yes.
Okay, sweet. Excellent. So I'm going to let Sarah go ahead and introduce the kind of the background of the yoga studio and where it's been, where it is, and what her vision is for this event. And then also I'll have her share the outcomes that we created for the event. So Sarah, take it away.
All right, I'm going to pull up that sheet too before. Okay, so just a little background, because maybe not everyone knows where this piece comes into the puzzle. So my role here is I work for a gentleman who has an investment management company. He manages over $850 million in private client wealth assets, has been doing that for 35 years. I've been with him for the last 12 years, doing marketing, communications, strategic development. And 8 years ago, he and his brother decided to open up a yoga and fitness studio just down the street in our city center. And unfortunately, he and his brother had a bit of a falling out. And I came in to help out 60 days before they were supposed to open. And so we have a 7,000 square foot studio. It has 4 rooms. We offer 115 classes a week. We have cycling classes, all fitness class. It's all class based. It's not a gym. So for us, it was about building a community. And my boss, who I work for, this endeavor for him was not about ever making money. Where he makes his money and his living is through the investment management company. And so this was about providing something for the community. He felt like it was really important for people to have a third place to go. And so our mission has been from day one to foster inspiration. And currently we have, I don't know if I said 70 people on our payroll. And that ranges from, we have 10 front desk people. We're open 7 days a week, 364 days a year. We close one day, that is in July. It is during this crazy thing called Cherry Festival that we have here. And they shut down all the streets and there's a parade and no one can get to our studio. But we are open all other days of the week, of the year. And open a lot of hours. So we have 10 front desk people, and then we have about 60 teachers. And the commitment of those teachers varies. Some of them teach once a week. Some of them this is their full-time gig. They are there every day teaching multiple classes a day. So it's challenging to manage and oversee that type of culture because they're not integrated on a regular basis. You might have a teacher that comes in at 1 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons that only sees 3 other employees ever because that's the time they come in. So my challenge is not only fulfilling the mission, but how do I continue to create that culture with such a diverse group of people? And I've learned a lot over the last 7 years. I thought when I had to step in and help out, I thought this is going to be super easy. These are yoga teachers. Like, they have to be so easy to manage. And they probably have been the hardest people for me to manage and work with in my entire career. Huh. So it did not go as easy as I thought it would. But right now, everything is great. I just want everything to continue to be great. And we haven't taken an opportunity in a long time to have like a team meeting or a summit. And I've been thinking about it. And when I was at Leaf training, that's what I started working on. That was what kept coming up for me in the back of my head is how can I create a summit for all of these lovely yin yoga people to come together? And how can I get them to focus on some outcomes that I see that I don't get the opportunity to communicate because I don't see very many of them. Mm-hmm. So that was something I talked to Jeremy about, and we've been working on since we came back from Leaf. We've had several meetings, and we've also incorporated Temple, who is the manager of the studio. And I think we have a really good framework, and how we're setting it up is we're having it at, it's called Kirkbride Hall. And it is at this beautiful old chapel that is part of a completely renovated state hospital that was a mental state hospital, but was started in the early 1900s by Dr. Kirkbride. And so they've been renovating all of these buildings, and it's the old chapel where all the employees and all the patients used to go and pray, or they had group gatherings. And they've got these giant, beautiful windows that face north and south. and there's stained glass, and the acoustics are amazing. And it's not a huge room, but the energy feels great when you get in there. And that was the place I really saw us having this summit. So our structures is that we're going to have yoga in the morning first off, and there's going to be music with a harmonium and some mantra based. And I have one of the top teachers who's been with us from the beginning doing that and pairing up with another teacher. And then Jeremy is going to facilitate for us. I don't want to be the facilitator because technically I'm their boss, and I want to be part of the event and not be facilitating or have them have any fear in sharing anything. So that's why I felt that Jeremy would be great for this. And he's been talking to the teachers, and we've also set up some interviews. And I don't know, John, how much detail should I go into? I don't want to overdo it. So,
well, everything thus far is really helpful. I think what could be helpful would be if you want to give us a high level of what you're doing right now, how the day looks. And so what I see in your agenda is you've got a balance, and your day is an embodiment of what this community is about. So you have yoga and music, which is great. You're in an inspiring environment, which is great. Which, by the way, it's real easy to just brush past that observation. But I think it's a good reminder for us to remember that, look, if we're bringing a community together, we always want the engagement to embody whatever that community is about, right? So it's worth pointing out that you're clearly doing that. I can see on your agenda that you have interspersed. You've got a couple of conversations, which are probably the things that I could give the most input on, or this group can. And then interspersed around that, you've got some folks that are bringing some insight to the group through an interview. Maybe the thing to focus on first right now would be, what are the two primary, because I see there's two. There's one in the morning, and then there's one in the afternoon, because your meeting kind of starts in the morning with yoga, music, and then you've got a short interview, then you've got a group activity, then a short interview, then lunch, then some music, short interview, and then a final activity, and then you kind of close out the day. So maybe we start with, what are these two activities? Because that's the part where there's going to be the most active engagement, and where you got to design and facilitate the right conversation. So let's start with those. And Sara, whether it's you or Jeremy, what's your goal for each of those conversations right now?
Oh, I'd love to
Jeremy,
take that. That's good.
You want to take it?
Yeah. So let me just pull this up really quick. There's actually 3 questions, just to be clear on that sheet.
Okay.
So I'll just start with the first question, or the first interview. The first interview is going to be, so we're going to get them into their hearts first, and help them to reconnect with why they joined Yen, why they became a teacher, what type of impact they've already seen in their journey of being someone who is, if you're a yoga teacher, or a cycling teacher, you're there and you're giving to students. So having them reflect upon some of the images in which they've seen themselves make a difference, or feel a deep sense of purpose or connection to being an instructor. Or also, there's going to be 10 front desks. So, embedding in that first question as a team member, what are the experiences? So maybe someone at the front desk had an experience different than a teacher, but the goal is to get from that first question is to get them to reflect upon the times that they've already been feeling a sense of connection, purpose, passion, alignment with being part of this Yen community. And that question will be set up by an interview with a lady who's been part of the Yen community as a student, or you might say a client.
Great.
But the very first interview is with a client who's battled cancer and has battled, a lot of trials and tribulations with that journey. And so one of her kind of sanctuaries, or places that she's been coming, that she loves, is Yen. And the difference that Yen has meant for her in her life through the classes, the community, the teachers, the connections, is something that we're going to draw out inside of her. I'm meeting with her on December 6th. And I just want to get more of I already have an idea of the type of questions I'm going to ask. But I want to meet with her and just get a feel for what's her vibe, and that will help me to be more deliberate or intentional in the way that I create the questions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that interview will set up that question. And the question I have written out is, reflect on all the times you felt inspired to be part of Yen Yoga and Fitness. These might be your own personal highlights, high point moments you created for someone else, or an experience you had with the Yen Yoga and Fitness team. These could be times where you felt connected, felt like you were making an impact, or you felt feeling a deep sense of purpose. Identify 1 to 2 examples and describe them with as much detail as possible. So I'll have them go into that. I've got music queued up, ready to go, some Inception, and then they'll go into that exercise for roughly 3 to 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So this is where we definitely want your help. So you were spot on, which is, how long do we have them write for? And then what type of exercise should we take them into as they share? So we've got a built-in a little more than 30 minutes for that, for the question and for all the work.
Great.
So I can stop there, or we can go into question 2 and you can see the whole roadmap, and then you can decide what type of activity and the timing.
Yeah. So I'm gonna open up my brain here. I'm gonna tell all of you what I'm thinking right now. So what I'm thinking is, when I'm attempting to embody. I'm trying to enter. I was going to say I'm trying to enter your body, Jeremy, and that sounds a little too intimate. And then I was going to say Sara, and that sounds inappropriate. But now I've said it.
Especially these days.
So if I was you, right? Can you believe there was a clean way of saying that? If I was you, what I'm thinking about when I'm planning a conversation is I'm actually thinking about, I'm not even thinking about this meeting. I'm thinking about continually, what are the next 5 meetings, right? I'm thinking about, and now before that causes confusion, let me clarify. If we all believe it's valuable to bring a community together once and it's worth our time, then we probably believe it's the kind of thing we're doing regularly, right? So one of the things I'm actually thinking is this the first time they're being brought together in this kind of context? And can you just clarify, is this kind of the first time they'll be brought together through this style, or will they have been brought together before in other ways?
They've been brought together before in other ways. We've done one other big group meeting, and then we've done smaller group meetings to accommodate all the crazy schedules. Okay, great. Is it the first time where they might be doing these exact conversations, this deep connecting? Okay, great. So that, by the way, is an important distinction, right? When we know it's the first time they're coming together in a certain way, right? That's important because there's a lot of you on this call. I'm looking at all of you, from Steve to Deanna to Mo to, almost all of you. One of the things we have to be careful of is when we've done this so much is to think that every time we do it, we're just doing it the same way. And we have to realize if it's the first time a group is coming together, not only does our choice of first question and first activity, is it critical, but even how we enroll them in it is really critical, right? So just so all of you understand how I'm thinking about this as a stakeholder in this community is, okay, it's the first time, great. And I'm also imagining, if we're going to be coming together again and again, part, Jeremy, of how you want to be setting this up is making sure that before they even do the activity, that you help them to understand that we're not having a conversation right now just to have it right now, but we're having a conversation that's the kind of conversation that maybe we ought to be having all the time, right? So that seed should be carefully planted. So I'm thinking long term, because there are certain types of conversations. So what you're starting with here is where I would start, which is you're going to have them find a story that exemplifies why being a part of this community is so meaningful for them, right? And so I will give you a little bit of reshaping of the language that I think can make it easier for more people to more quickly get. Yeah. So that's great. And my point here is I would want to have a regular rhythm, a ritual, regimented, that at regular intervals, it might not be the whole group, but groups of all sizes, they are regularly coming, like even weekly, a standing huddle that says over the last 7 days, what was something that happened that reminded me why this is such meaningful work? Do you guys get where we're going with this? So my point is,
ideally, and this is something that I have learned, I need to do a better job of conveying into this community, which is that this work should not be about an event. This work should be about building a capacity for people to have certain conversations again and again and again and again, right? Because if we all say it's important to have this conversation, and arguably the most important one, why are we here? Then doesn't it make sense that we should be learning how to habitually have that conversation? So I just wanted to lay that out, that's how I think about this. We want to build an ongoing capacity. It's easy to see this as a great event and even be blinded when people walk out and say it's a great event to the reality that the best impact we're going to make is if we view this as a catalyst to do this again and again and again, right? So now that I've laid that out, you realize why I put a lot of gravity into what's that first activity. Because it's not just, do we run a great meeting today? You could pick any question to start with. It'll be a great meeting, but you want to be setting a tone for ongoing conversations. So Jer, before we kind of reconstruct, if we need to, that first question, tell us what the next 2 or 3 are. Because I do like to look at the day as a whole before I think too much more about the individual questions.
For sure.
Yeah.
So that will lead into, so they'll do the question 1, then they'll go into, writing, and then of course sharing, and then group shares. And then that will lead right into Temple, who is someone who has worked herself up as a person who was a sub. So I think she was actually front desk and then became a sub, meaning she was a substitute teacher. Then she became a teacher, and she's had amazing retention, built amazing classes. And now she is the manager of the studio. So she's gone from, the very, very, I don't want to say the lowest, but the entry level all the way up to like basically the top level. And so the goal of interviewing her is to just have someone, because the room itself is set up of all these different people at different levels. So by interviewing Temple, the goal is to get kind of a synopsis of where she was at each level and how she made the jumps between the levels, her mindset, her habits, her beliefs, some of those things that I want to draw out in her. She's also most likely going to cry and have tears in her eyes, undoubtedly. So there will be an emotional kind of flood for certain people in the room who both get to know her on a deeper level. Although I know she does tear up a lot from what she tells me. So it's just part of her personality, which I think is a beautiful thing to bring into the room, some vulnerability. And so but the goal is to draw out the stories of how she made the transitions and some of the challenges that she overcame. And that leads into the question, which is going to be, imagine 1 year from now, you've made your own quantum leap in yin yoga and fitness. Not sure if that's the right word. What would that big leap look like? How many classes would you be teaching? What type of teacher would you be for your students? What would be your morning ritual? How much money would you be making? And I made these very, very, this is so vague and universal because this was one where I really wanted to have your help in regards to the question.
Great. Okay, great.
And then lunch, and then come back in with a little bit of music, get people fired up. And then we go into an interview with Wes. And Wes is a cycling teacher at Yin Yoga and Fitness. And he's very savvy with the way that he, number one, prepares his classes. So this particular interview is going to be about retention. How do you build a class, and how do you retain actual students coming back to your class in a way where they're looking forward to your class? They might be bringing a friend, but it's in their schedule and they're making an effort to come to your class because they enjoy it so much. So how do you get them there, and how do you retain them? And he's done a really good job of doing that, from his preparation to the way he interacts with people, to his social media posts, to the way he creates events, a whole bunch of different things that I sat down with him yesterday and got kind of a rundown of his whole routine, and it'll be very helpful. And my idea there was, and also Sarah's kind of one of her objectives or goals was, hey, how can we have a question like this where we get to draw out potential themes? So we do the interview, and then we say, I tried to make the question really simple, which is like, what were the top 2 or 3, insights that Wes gave that resonated with you the most? And I might even say, or what are the ones that you feel like you're already doing where you're strong? And then I would have them get into groups. There's going to be roughly in between 55 and 70 people there. So we'll get them into groups of whatever number, and then we'll have them kind of rapid fire share with each other and then use sticky notes and put them on kind of larger flip charts or boards, to where they're in real time watching each other put the themes that they either feel like they're doing well at, or that they know that they could apply, that would help them to build their classes, which ultimately helps them to also connect to what you might call Wes. And this exercise is helping them to connect to the strategy, which then brings them back to how to make number 2 reality.
Yeah. Okay, great. Very good. Very good. Can I share some ideas?
Dude, please share some ideas. And
Okay.
just so you know, the way that I wrote this, and this is kind of a peek behind the way that Sara and I constructed this for everyone else who is doing their own events. One thing that I probably said 50 times to Sara and Temple during our meetings is, we don't really need to get that deep on it, because what we want to do is we want to bring some sort of a skeleton or a rough draft to John, so that we're not too connected and committed to the agenda that we've created that we think is perfect, but that we're coming with somewhat of a skeleton where we have a whole lot of openness to then provide to John, so he can reshape it, and then we can get a little bit more connected to it. So that's how we created the flow of this, with that in mind.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share some ideas, and I'm also going to ask Sara, you and Jer some questions here just to check in on some of these. So one of the things I notice is that your agenda, so let's say you have 3 activities, each of them sparked by some kind of insight. So overall, I'm looking for this kind of meeting I would want to be a participant in. I can't, not just because there's music there. So I could see this is going to be really successful. I see that what you're doing is you have one conversation to help them connect to purpose. You have one conversation helping them to connect to their future as a part of the community. And then you have one where there's some more tactical idea generating about retention, right? So seeing that works. I think that as a rule of thumb, when I'm designing, and based on the constraint of your day starts around, I'm calling it, 8:30, 9 o'clock, you've got yoga until your real meeting kind of kicks off at 10:30, and then your meeting is done by 2.
Yeah.
So the question I'm always asking is what's most essential? And when I put an agenda together, I always assume that my first cut, I've put too much in there.
Great.
And if you've got 3 conversations right now, a good question is, if it was only 2, which would be the best? Or which would be most important right now? And so one of the things that I like is if I'm thinking about the continual engagement of a community, like what we all know how to do through this training is we know how to enable conversations that lift the individual. And then we know how to have conversations that explicitly lift the community. I think it's not a bad idea that your first meeting is really emphasizing it being about them. There's benefits to that. And if they really enjoy the meeting, which they will, you'll get them excited to come to the next one, where there can still be a part that's about them, but now you could blend in more that's about the community, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah. And some of these questions about them as individuals implicitly, indirectly do also clearly serve the community, just not directly as if we were saying, what do we love about this community, right? And having that conversation. So I just want to acknowledge, I see that's the level at which you're aiming towards. And if I were you, I'd think if there's one way, it doesn't mean you're getting rid of that third conversation, but maybe you're okay knowing that it's not going to get as deep as you know how to let it go. That's the hardest thing as a facilitator. When you know you have a tool that could be doing a whole crowdsourcing strength around what's the best thing we've all done to retain members. That could be a half-day meeting. That could be a full day. And you could be blown away by what comes out of that. The hard thing is to know that you could do that and decide we're going to actually let it be a small little thing, like a teaser almost. And maybe at the next meeting, it'll be a more full-blown crowdsourcing strengths. Because when you can let go of that, then we don't cause stress in the meeting thinking, I got to get more out of that part of the conversation. What I would consider doing with these 3 ingredients that you have, connecting them to a sense of purpose. And again, don't forget, that ought to be a habitual thing. Connecting them to the future, that ought to be a regular conversation. That ought to be a regular rhythm every week or every month. What do you want the next week to look like for you? That conversation should be an ongoing thing. And then your third one is, what's working? What's a skill that's working right now? I would adjust the order of these if you can, I would, because you have right brain, left brain. I don't want to finish the day analytical. I'd rather be at heart, mind, heart. Especially if Temple, and by the way, the answer to all your questions of how she evolved is her name, Temple, right? Make sure you ask her, what role is your name played in your own evolution? So the Temple interview, I'd make that the end of the day. I want to start with heart, finish with heart. And by the way, we heard Pete Vargas at Best Year Ever. I mean, this is his formula, and he's the best in the world at the storytelling. But a whole day is a story that we're all telling, right? So I would move that analytical to the middle of the day, and then let it finish with heart. A couple of things here, Jer, is when you're prepping Temple. So this is great for all of you who do interviews. So the best way to prepare somebody, if you know you're going to interview them, is just like this. I have a call scheduled ahead of time. And let's say I'm going to be interviewing Jeremy at an upcoming meeting. And let's say I don't know him that well. And in most cases, you eventually get to the point where you're going to be interviewing people you don't know that well. And what I would do is Jeremy would answer the phone, and I'd say, Jer, I can't wait for our upcoming meeting. And then guess what I would do? I would not tell him what I'm doing. I would actually start the interview. Mm-hmm. I'd say, hey, I'd love to get to know you. Tell me about your story. And so Jer, for your prep, when you prep to interview somebody, don't talk about the interview, do the interview. And don't tell them that you're doing the interview. I do that with billionaires like Jeff Hoffman, to David Osborne, to anybody that I'm bringing on, is I just ask them the questions during the prep that I would ask on stage, so I can see how are they actually going to respond. Mm-hmm. And then after I ask the 2 or 3 or 4 questions, then I might go back and say, okay, hey, you know that conversation we just had? That's actually what we're going to do. How great is that? And then I might say, are you open to a couple thoughts on how we have that conversation? Yeah. Remember when I asked you this earlier and you shared this? I encourage you to really emphasize this part, right? And so, but have the actual interview first, then go back, let them know, hey, what we're going to do is what we just did. Does that make sense? Especially with somebody who you say gets really emotional. The best way you could support somebody where there's a little bit of potential volatility and what could happen on stage is to just give them a repetition beforehand, right? And if you need to coach them, say, here's the exact questions. Go practice answering these out loud 2 or 3 or 4 times, not so that the emotion goes away, so that they can practice being with the emotion that's going to come from those stories, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I've only learned this from how many interviews I've done now, where I'm on stage thinking, oh my gosh, why did I not follow my own advice? And I got to sweep it all up. All right. So that's how I would prep Temple there. And then let's go through each of the 3 questions. I'll give you some thoughts on this and then open up if anyone else wants to add to this. So your first question on purpose, I think what's really important is, I've learned that connecting people to a sense of purpose is one of those things that can be challenging, and it can also be made very attainable by being very clear with what you're asking for. And so what I would do is I would make sure that the way I'm setting this up, so you're interviewing Lynn, who's a client. When you're done interviewing Lynn, without saying, hey, you're going to go to your workbook and we're going to do an exercise and the question starts with this, think of a high point moment. What I would do is just as informally as is possible, when Lynn is done, I would turn to the group and I would say, how many of you, as we're listening to Lynn, have been thinking about examples that remind you of why this work is so important, right? Like, just get to the heart of it, right? As soon as I'm done with that interview, I would turn to them and just in a human conversation between me and the group that is working together, I'd say, hey, look, we've all had moments. We've all had examples, and we probably all have stories, if we sit and think about it, of specific times that when we reflect on those times, and maybe it was a way that we impacted somebody. Maybe it was a conversation we had. Maybe it was watching somebody have a breakthrough in a class. But we all probably have moments that when we reflect on are examples of why being a part of this community means so much to each of us individually. So you notice what I'm doing is I'm going right from the interview to we all can connect to these. And then I'd say, in fact, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to uncover and share some of these examples together. So if you want to go ahead and turn to page 3 in your workbook, I'd love to draw your attention right here. And go ahead and grab your pens to be ready, because we're going to do a little bit of journaling in just a second here, right? Then I'd go to the page, and then I would read through the question that they probably just heard me share. But when they thought it was informal, and when they thought it was just right from the heart, and it still was, they're really open to it. As soon as we say turn the page, we're going to do an exercise, you always have a percentage of people that are going to get a little bit nervous or closed off. So I'm creating a bridge there between the interview to help them. I'm slowly holding their hand, slowly walking them into where we're going. So then on that page, it's probably going to be almost exactly what I just said in a very human way. But now I'm going to read it. I'm going to say, hey, we're going to do a quick exercise right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite you. In fact, I'd probably give this instruction before I turn to the page, because as soon as you turn to the page, you lose a part of them because they're doing something else. I'd say, so here's what we're about to do. We're going to do an activity where we're actually going to invite you to reflect on a moment, an example, a story, a specific time, that when you think about that moment or that example or that specific story, and if you want to think about 2 or 3, that's okay, but we want to make sure you just think of at least one. A time that when you think about that story, it was a breakthrough for a client. Maybe it was a breakthrough for yourself. Think about the story you just heard for Lynn. We've all seen and felt and been around incredible stories of breakthroughs and positive moments as a part of this community. We're actually going to invite you to jot down a couple notes so that you could be ready to share those stories with each other. Because one of the practices that we want to build in this community is making sure that we're actually lifting up and continually reconnecting to these stories, these examples of moments that give us a sense of fulfillment and purpose and meaning and pride. So I'd say, I'd probably say that, then I'd go to the page, right? Because when it's human to human, eyeball to eyeball, they get the essence of the exercise. As soon as I say go to the page, I lose a little part of them. I get another part of them, but I lose the part that can connect deeply to the essence before we get into here's your instructions, right? So now I turn to the page. Hopefully my instructions are as clear as whatever I just said. And it's going to say, hey, think of a time, a specific story, a moment, an example for you that when you reflect on that moment, embodies why it is that being a part of this community is so important, valuable, meaningful, or purposeful for you. And you notice what I'm doing by giving them a menu at the end there? I'm doing that because what I have learned, and I don't fully understand what it is, why this works, but what I have learned is that if I just say, think of a story that tells you why you find so much purpose in your work. Well, the challenge with that is they all have a different definition of purpose anyways. And I don't want to give a lecture on what purpose means. I don't know what it means. I have my version. So they all have a different definition. Really what I'm trying to get at is what is it about this work that is meaningful, fulfilling, purposeful? And so I give that menu of words for people. And what I find that does is everybody in their own way connects to the deepest essence of the activity, right? Because they get that through the spirit of how I'm bringing them into that activity. It's not about the words. It's not just about the words, but it's about the spirit of the activity. And I have found again and again, I can continually craft average questions and do an average job of facilitating. And for some reason, when people realize we're searching for stories about things that matter, it always prevails. So I'd have them write down a story. I'd have them get in groups of 4 or 5, circled up, no tables, right? And I'd have them share those and let them know, say, hey, and you could either tell them in advance, right? Because it looks like you don't have enough time to go too far with this. But in circles of 3 or 4, if you have a little more time, 4 or 5, just for every person in the group, add 4 minutes, right? And then you could tell them in advance. You could say, share your stories and listen to each other. Listen to what it is that connects you to being a part of this community. And then when they're done, invite people voluntarily to share. Would anybody like to share either your own story or maybe one that you heard that really inspired you? Right now, while they're doing the sharing, you're walking around looking. And when you see people getting emotional, that's one where you want to hear them share their own story. People will not get as emotional if you just have them share what somebody else said. They will get emotional if you have them share their own story. So if you see that happening, I'm going to pinpoint those people and I'm going to call them out or tap them on the shoulder and prep them and draw some of those out. And that'll be a high point moment of the whole day right there, right? Yep. So that's some thoughts on that question, that activity. How much time to write, and then how much time to write, and then how much time each for them to share? Well, I would probably say 4 to 5 minutes to write, and then I'm watching. And once I see 80% of the room, once I sense completeness in what they're writing, either by what I see or just what I feel, I'll let them know you got about a minute left to capture any more thoughts. And I knowingly will be interrupting a third of the room, and I let them know, hey, no problem if you're still writing. You'll be able to bring those thoughts into the conversation you're about to have, right? So I'd tell them 4 or 5 and then see how that goes.
Okay.
And I know there's a choice here. Do you have them identify 2 or 3 stories, or do you pick just one? You notice what I did is I actually gave them, it's like, it's a choice of choices. I say, hey, have at least one. If you think of 2 or 3, jot them all down. You know what that does, by the way? That helps you with all the overachievers who think everything is about getting the work done first. Because if I say, just pick one, half the room's done really fast, because that's just how they roll. But when I say, or you could pick 2 or 3, sometimes I'll give the instruction. I'll say, once you've found one, find another and find another. That way, everyone is still writing throughout the exercise. Because if I can, I do want to avoid having half the room sitting there while half is writing, right? And so I can actually enable that by how I give that direction. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so those are some thoughts on that question. And I'll give you some thoughts on the last one, because the middle one is going to be easier, I think, to orchestrate. That's the more analytical one. That's just a matter of choosing how do you orchestrate, the question and what did they learn and how they share that. Let's go to the last one, which is your interview with Temple and how in her journey, right? So first things first, before you start the interview, one of the seeds that I would plant is I would say, hey, everybody, before you learn about Temple's story, I invite you to be open to reflecting on your own story, right? And as you hear Temple's story, I invite you, while you're hearing that, to see within her story what your journey is or what it might be, right? Because that's part of why we lift up stories in the community, because when we lift them up and we share them, they become our own, right? They become each other's. So you're planting that seed. And what I've learned is by planting that seed, you really increase the rate at which people can go really far with the activity you have them do afterwards, right? You're giving, I would say, hey, before we start here, before we invite up Temple and she's going to share her story with you, I invite you to use this opportunity to see within her story your own story. And this might be the story of the journey that you've already traveled, and you can use that as a chance to appreciate where you've come from. It might also be that you see within her story the story of where you might go, what your future could look like, right? So you're just planting that seed. You're giving them a little bit of a lens through which to receive that interview, right? And that'll affect a certain percentage of people in the audience. After she shares, now you're moving them into an activity. And I think what you got to be really clear on is what is the single goal of that activity? And what I'm seeing is you want them to be looking into their future, right? And a really simple way of setting that up is you could do it the way you've got it set up. I would be careful around using words that mean something to you, but maybe not to them. Like the idea of making a quantum leap. Well, a quantum leap in what way, right? And I notice you're actually attempting to help them realize in whatever way they want. What I like to ask myself is, how can I get rid of all the words and get to the essence of what we're doing? The essence here is, what do you want your story to be? What do you want your story to be for the next year? Right? And I would deconstruct and get rid of all the labels and words that are not the essence. Now you could bring those in if they're part of your culture, if they're easily understood. But I think the essence is, what do you want your story to be for the next year? And if we could imagine for the next few minutes that just like children can imagine their future, that what if it was true? What if it was true that as easily as you invite images of the future, as easily as you could write down a word on a piece of paper, that could actually become reality? If that was true, then maybe a great activity we could do for the next few minutes is actually just like kids, imagine what would we like our story to be for the next year. So I invite you to take a few minutes and just to journal. Don't judge, don't filter. You can, whatever part of your life that you want to see thriving and growing and flourishing, if it has to do with being a part of this community, wonderful. But I wouldn't even constrain them to it being about being in this community. You could, but I think the more open you make it, the more opportunity for people to connect to something that gets them really excited. Right? So I just think get connected to the essence of that. It's what do you want your story to be for the next year? And I do think it's okay to have it be within the container of the community. I think that's okay. Just make sure that within that container, there's lots of freedom to what could that look like for you. You know, give them lots of thought joggers, remind them that it could be anything they want, and then just let them journal. Let them journal, and then have them turn to each other, probably in pairs or groups of 3. When I have people share visions of the future, I usually will do that in a smaller group. For a few reasons. One, smaller group means they get more time. And I want people to have more and more time for them to just allow these ideas to come out. And the other instruction I give people is after they've journaled about the future, is when they're talking about it, I give them permission to talk about all sorts of things that you didn't write down. Because that's what happens. Once people start talking, and I say, hey, allow the act of sharing and having a conversation about it to create ideas that you didn't even think of when you were journaling. Have fun with that. There's no reason you can't go as far as you want. So I would do groups of 2 or 3 when they're talking about their future. The other reason I make those small groups is because that's a conversation. I want people to have the lowest amount of insecurity, the lowest amount of reservation. And typically the larger the group, the more people will shrink a little bit what they're going to share. So I'd have them in groups of 2 or 3. I'd give them 10 minutes to share with each other their visions of the future. I always will tell them when people are having discussions like this, and actually this is almost a rule of thumb for any conversation on any question, get up, standing, spread around the room. And part of the benefit of having them spread around the room, one, they change their physiology, opens up new possible mental capabilities. If I don't want them to just be in the same place the whole time. The other thing is very practical. If they spread around the room, they are not burdened by the noise of people talking right next to them. Just a very practical implication here. Spread all around the room. Go around the perimeters. And when people don't have to work as hard to talk over all the voices talking at the same time, I think that helps a certain segment of people in an activity like this. So I might give them 10 to 12 minutes and tell them, hey, I'll tell you when it's halfway up. So if you haven't, you switched, go ahead. And then at halfway, I'll say, hey, it's been 5 minutes or it's been 6 minutes. Have the other person share. That would be if they're in pairs. And then bring them all back to their seats. And then the magic happens then when you invite people, hey, who'd like to share? Maybe would anybody like to, and this is where you have to be specific about what do you want them to share. And this, I've learned this every event I do because I continually am reminded I got to do a better job of this. What do I want them to share? Right. So, and what you can do is you can give people a menu if you want, unless you need or want something specific. So an example of what would be the menu of what they could share would be A, would anybody be willing to share some of your images or visions for the future? What do you want your story to look like? That's one specific ask, right? B would be, so that's in that case, they're specifically sharing the output of the activity. You could also have them share what was their experience of the activity, right? And I've noticed myself making a mistake and not being clear in these. So I'll say, hey, who'd like to share? What did you experience? Where in my head, I'm thinking they're going to share their vision, and they get up and they say, I loved this, and it was so great to talk to Sara, and we really bonded, and we're going to be friends now. And I'm thinking, oh, what I wanted was for them to share their story, not their experience of the activity. There's other times where I actually want the experience of the activity more than the output. But when it's future visions, I'll probably give them a menu and say, hey, I'd love to hear, would any of you be willing to share any of your visions of the future? And how did it make you feel going through the process of creating those visions? So you see what we did there is I'm getting both now. So now I'm getting their vision of the future and what was your experience? What was it like? What did you feel? What was that like coming up with that, talking it out loud? So anybody willing to share their vision as well as what was your experience of that? Or does anybody want to also acknowledge somebody for what they shared? Did it inspire you what their vision was or the way they shared it? Now, if you give that menu, it's important to know what's probably going to happen is the first person is probably going to acknowledge somebody else because it's less vulnerable to acknowledge someone else. And it's important to know that if the first person is going to acknowledge somebody else, the next share and the next after that is probably going to be acknowledging others. Because typically, when you have group shares, they will follow the flow of whatever the first person does. Because even if someone was preparing to share their own, if somebody else starts with an acknowledgement, they're actually now going to think, oh, I don't want to be selfish. So they'll hold back and they'll let someone else stand up who wants to acknowledge. So here's why that's important. Because depending on how much time you have, what's ideal is both. What's ideal is for people to share their vision and their experience of creating that and to get some acknowledgement. So if you have time, and I've only just finally figured out the puzzle pieces here because in my head, I always think I want to see something happen and then it gets derailed and I finally realize, oh, here's how to fix that. So if you have the time, I would start with, I'd love to hear from a few of you, what is the story that you created, that you shared, and what was your experience of coming up with that? Take a couple of those shares, then invite, would anybody like to acknowledge, you say, would anybody else like to share, or would anybody like to acknowledge something they heard that they really appreciated? So you kind of segment those two types, if that makes sense. If you're short on time, you can invite both and let whatever happens happen. Either way, it's going to be positive. The other thing you could do is if you invite both and you get people just acknowledging, you could always jump in after one or two and say, hey, that's really awesome. You know what I'd love to hear a couple of before we close this out? I'd love to hear from a few of you what your story was that you can, if you think it might inspire others. And what was your experience of coming up with that story for your future? So you can directly ask if you weren't getting the type that you wanted. Does that help, Jer?
Dude, epic. I want to be respectful of the time because Deanna's still got to go. But I do want help. I do want help. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, no one else was listening. They know this was just for you guys, and it's not going to apply to them ever. It's not going to help them ever. I don't mind taking the time here because my job is to try and be aware if I'm sharing something that probably applies to everybody. And there's nothing here that's just specific to your event. Not that it's not special and that we're all not special, but hopefully everyone's realizing, wow, all of this technology, it applies every time we go into something. So, and I see you're going to close with a circle. Get the furniture out of the way, circle, stick, nail it.
We got talking sticks, we got the drum.
What should that question be with the talking sticks? We're both going to bring our little talking sticks from me.
Yeah. Well, and a shout out to Mo McKenna here, who she really is the one who introduced this to me. We just had a meeting a couple weeks ago where we, a group of blue collar workers for Clark, as we're kicking off their summit planning. And I remember the team was like, oh, is this going to work? Is this going to work? And I thought, I think it's going to work. In your case, it's a bunch of yogis. They're great with a talking stick in a circle. You could do the whole day like that. But what I like to do is give some sort of light, brief explanation as to what we're doing. Now, the way I do that can change depending on the group. Many of you have been at meetings where what you've seen me do is give no explanation. I literally would just say, hey, the way that we're going to close out our gathering today, you notice I call it a gathering, not a meeting. The way we're going to close out this gathering is by inviting any of you who would like to share whatever is on your mind or in your heart. And it could be an acknowledgement of somebody else. It could be how you feel about the day, about the community, anything that you feel compelled to share. Not everybody has to share. This is just an invitation for you as really the members and owners of this community to have the last word. So, and by the way, that right there is very symbolic and meaningfully important to point out. We want you to have the last word. That sends a very interesting message, just symbolically, if not directly. So at that point, I'll just hold the stick out and say, who would like to share any thoughts first? And that's it. All right. With some groups, I give a little more explanation. I've been experimenting with telling them the story about one of my mentors, Mo McKenna, who learned from indigenous tribes that the way they came together to solve or resolve any conflict or create their community was by coming together in a circle and giving everybody the respect of listening to anything that anybody would like to say, right? So that could be a very brief explanation. There you go.
Perfect.
Those of you who were at the Global Forum, we pulled it off with 400 people in the room. We literally moved the chairs, moved the tables, moved everything, and had a huge circle, and we did it. It was cool. Okay. Sarah, Jer, anything else? And does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts for them, questions for me on anything that we just covered?
My only question is the number 2. You made a comment like that's a left brain activity that should be easy. How should we go about doing the themes of what works? Like, just because I don't know
if you're going to have time to do theming.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm looking at the agenda. I could definitely be wrong, but my first reaction is I wouldn't even try and do it. I would save that for a future gathering, so that they
cool.
can.
Yeah, I think that people are. I mean, I think with the shares, early on, when you were talking about, John, the depth of connectedness, and leading with a community from your last event, that's really where I'm going with this. They're going to get some pieces out of it that are more analytical that I'm going to give them in their workbook, which is like their retention numbers, how many students have they taught, things that we do talk about on a yearly or biannual basis with them. So they know that that's important, but I want them to come to the meaning of connecting with students in order to build our community and create a better community. So I think this work will get us there. I believe it will get us there versus having the specific questions about retention. I think we can still interview Wes, but maybe not have to do the theme work.
You could interview Wes, and there's kind of a light way to have them still have great conversations around retention, which is interview Wes. And then one way of affirming or acknowledging that interview is you could do a rapid fire right where they're seated. Say, hey, just raise your hand, shout out. What's something you loved that you just heard that you look forward to implementing? And let people start shouting ideas out, right? And then if you have time, what you could do is you could say, hey, all of us have experience that we can draw from our own experience of things that we've seen or done that have helped with retention. So in the spirit of sharing wisdom from across the room, I'd like for all of you to take 30 seconds right now and think, what's the most impactful behavior or action step or habit that you feel you've seen that has helped with retention, either within your own classes or with others? Have them give them 30 seconds to write it down. Move them up into standing groups of 3 and say, go share with each other. What did you just write down? So that's like a micro rapid fire version of crowdsourcing wisdom. And even after that, did anybody hear anything that they thought was really cool that you'd love to share? And that'll give them a meaningful conversation, but you could still do it really quickly. Yeah, both of you have, Sarah, I don't know if you've seen us do it. Jerry, I know you've seen us do it, but in a room like this, I mean, you can do a half day crowdsourcing wisdom that melts their faces off their heads. You're not going to get that done with the other things you're doing here. And that's okay. It gives you something. It's great when you know that you have the capability to do a lot of great things and that you can save them for future meetings, right?
Could I also just add one other suggestion?
Please, Gina.
Yeah, take it or leave it. But if theming is something that makes sense to capture the facilitators, the people facilitating, or I know, Sarah, you're not going to facilitate the whole time. You want to be involved. But if there's somebody there kind of capturing what you're hearing in the room, you could always use that then as the follow-up after the event happens, so everybody can have a report out of what took place and kind of gets them excited about the next event, or invites them to respond to what the report that you're giving as an executive summary, so to speak. But it could be something that's done behind the scenes that then you present to them after the fact.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Great talk.
That's great, Gina. In fact, I learned a variation of that from Mo, which is you could always have people answer a question, that question of what's the most powerful habit or behavior or ritual, whatever, that creates retention or quality in an instructor, however you want to set that up. You could always have them write down their one answer on a Post-it note, a half-page Post-it, and they write that down, and they still just have that quick conversation, but you collect all those. And now you have the data from everybody's answer, and you can do with that what you want. Like Gina just said, you could take that, theme it out, type it up, send it out as something afterwards.
Thank you for participating. It could be anything, but at least it's a follow-up to show that this wasn't a one-time thing. We're trying to create a culture of getting everybody involved here. So since you had mentioned that as kind of a concern too, not only is this the first time they're all coming together, but you, culturally speaking, want to keep them more connected. So it's not just 3 people only seeing these 3 people here and that kind of thing. They've now met everyone, and boy, what a way to keep everybody connected then, especially if they're not on Facebook.
Right. It's a great idea.
Awesome. All right. Why don't we do this? Let's talk about the TED event, and then I'm going to set a timer for 12 minutes, and then after that, Deanna, we're going to talk about your event. How does that sound? Perfect. So Sara, do you want to set the stage here? Just, I mean, a lot of us are familiar with what a TED event is. And I want to plant a seed before you share. I'd love for everybody to think about this. I think this is a huge opportunity for every one of you as part of this community. TED is a very well-established, successful brand. It is a fully scaled enterprise. And what Sara is imagining here is the possibility of innovating how a TED event is done. And the reason this is a big deal is because what you're going to hear us talking about, my hope is you hear this and go, oh, well, almost, you might feel like, oh, I could be qualified to go to any TED event and deliver this as a solution to help them elevate their event. So this is a solution that we may or may not get to prototype with Sara's TED event, that if we can, and it's successful, that could be a really scalable opportunity for members of this community. So just planting a seed there. I don't know if that sounds as exciting to you as it does to me. But Sara, tell us about, feel free to catch people up on kind of the conversation thus far.
Okay, so a lot of you may have seen John's TEDx talk that he did last year with us at TEDx Traverse City. This is an event that we've been putting on. This will be our 8th year in May. And we have always, there's rules that you have to follow with the TEDx license that you get. You apply for a license from TED and you get a license, and there's rules that you have to follow. But something that I've always struggled with since day one, because our mission has been that we want to change people's consciousness with our event. We want them to leave and feel like they can do something better in their community, at work, at home, something that impacted them. But what I have grown more aware of and kind of concerned and struggle with is, how do I get them to connect more at the event? Because it's a type of event, if you haven't been to one, where it's kind of rapid. You know, nobody gets more than 18 minutes. They come on, they leave. They come on, they leave. You take a break. And it's just information being pushed to you. And there's not interaction or dialogue or group work that happens. And so what John and I were talking about last week is, how could we incorporate a little bit more AI into the TED event still staying within the parameters of it, some of the expectations, but start to evolve it. So it's just not all of this information coming at you, and then you take a bio break for 45 minutes, and then you come and sit back down. And how does the messaging get more ingrained in the attendees and change their consciousness even at a better level, higher level?
Yeah, when you look at TEDx and you look at the Edgar Dale cone of learning, TEDx is in the 10% of the Edgar Dale cone of learning. So when you have 400 people that are immersed in a room, and you have the opportunity, if you've been to a TED event, these people are in the room and they're there to be 100% present for the entire day. So they're an already bought in community to be very present in a room. And there's a lot of opportunity to use a TEDx platform to be able to make a huge change just because of the reason people are coming into that room. You're really leveraging maybe one of the most powerful resources in regards to people search for purpose in a place where they feel like they might be getting it. Mm-hmm. And what better combination than great speakers and then questions that allow the audience to interact with each other. So that's being part of it the last 2 years, and this being the third year. It's been interesting to be trained on AI and Leaf, and at the same time, as we're developing the theme this year, Awake and Aware, seeing like, wow, in order for people to really be awake and aware, they got to be having conversations with each other that expand beyond just the event. It has to do exactly what John said about Yen. These are conversations they need to leave with from that event and continue having in the communities, in their families, in their businesses, and with their friends.
Yeah.
We also have sorry, John, we also simulcast and live stream it. So that's something that we were talking about, is we have 400 people that are with us live in this auditorium, but we simulcast it to another theater a few blocks away. There's 500 people there watching it on a giant movie screen. And then you have it live streamed as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just starting to think about how do you incorporate it with those 3 audiences.
Yeah. Mo, did you want to share a thought?
So I was doing educating for resilience. I got my speaker on. I was doing educating for resilience for the positive psychology group a couple of weeks ago. And it's the exact same thing, speaker. And so I was able to get them not to move to a full AI summit concept or like the 3.0. But what we did was after every 2 or 3 speakers, we had people stand up and do that type of crowdsourcing. They were given a question and I followed the AIR process. What did you appreciate? The next question after a few speakers, what could you imagine taking this back to your schools? And then what are you going to do was the last one. So it was a kind of a soft introduction to doing something, and we got people up and standing. Now it's different because it's not in a theater. So that's the complexity too, that because I've gone to TED Talks and it's like, it's driven me crazy because I can't remember after the first speaker what happened. So, I think I'd invite you to think about modifications. And this one worked. We got really good feedback from people. And it was maybe like 7-8 minutes. We took some time out of the breaks. So I'll leave it at that just as a comment.
Yeah.
One thing, and just a quick question about Mo's. Was that all under was the umbrella one theme of the event?
Yes, it was all about educating for resilience for school. So it was an education group. But, we had talked about the ideas. Could you add on a couple of hours at the end for people who wanted to work, or add in another half a day? But people are so reluctant to give up the number of speakers is my experience. And that's so.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fabulous idea. And did you notice when the neuro leadership when they do their conferences, they will often have tabletop discussions, and the live stream, you just see the speakers kind of wandering around. So I can send you, Sarah, the link to one of their talks. It's not seamless, but it's natural. Mm-hmm. And their big thing is all about retention and learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share a couple of thoughts, and then also I have an otherworldly idea that is going to wake all of you up right here, and you're going to love this. So first, some basic thoughts, because the otherworldly idea actually involves every single one of you in this exact conversation. So the simple thought is, let's zoom out here and ask ourselves, what question are we asking? And the question that we're asking here is, how do we configure or align or tap into all of the exceptional strengths of a TEDx event and bring to that the strengths that we are aware of, or how do we magnify those strengths? That's really the question here, right? How do we create the greatest possible output from these strengths being brought together? I think it's worth saying, and we're certainly not going to get into it on this call, that the first thing we have to check in on, Sarah, and this could just be another conversation, is what are your contractual constraints, right? Because we don't want to design something and then find out that your license doesn't allow that. So we'll have to find out what those contractual constraints are. Once we understand those, really the next question to ask is, how do we take everything we know and help to evolve what happens at this event? And I'll share with all of you just a rapid fire couple of ideas, and then the otherworldly idea. So the rapid fire ideas are this. We all know, none of you need me to sit here and say, well, here's what we do before and after each talk. Every one of you on your own, almost by yourselves, could sit here and reconstruct the day and improve the day just from your training. We all know how to do that. From an execution perspective, there's a few things that are fundamental that really elevate the potential for success. Number one is how Sara and how TEDx Traverse City communicates to the participants before the event is going to be key, right? Because they have a history already of doing it one way. So it's going to be really important that it's very carefully, intentionally communicated, not just so that they are accepting of the idea, but so that they're embracing and excited by it, right? So from a change management perspective, one of the things, Sara, that we probably want to do is make sure that this concept, that we have some sort of minimum vision for it. But then what we need to do is we need to socialize it across your board, your biggest funders, and your advocates, whether they're formal or informal. Because if they're on board, well, then it's going to make everything else work. But this can't be a unilateral, Sara and Jeremy come up with this idea and then you just push it. Now, I think we got to socialize it with the right influencers, show them the thought behind this, show them the evidence for this. Ideally, I don't know if this will be possible, but ideally you actually give them an experience of it. That's the best way to convince somebody of something. So if there's a way to give them a microcosmic experience, we can talk about how that could happen. There may or may not be a setting to do that. So that's point one, is there's a whole lot of work that should happen up front to ensure that this is really successful. Jer?
I was just going to say, in regards to the board, we created the theme Awaken Aware through using appreciative inquiry with the 8 to 10 board members, and it seemed like it was a delightful experience for them. They all seemed to have just a great time. So there's already a seed planted for the board to say, wow, that was really enjoyable. We came up with a great theme. It was it's been put in place.
Great. The next question to ask, again, as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as a steward of this institute called TEDx, is what is the ideal? And are we trying to get to that ideal this year, or are we taking a step towards it? Because it could be that we all would create an ideal of what TEDx, the ideal, should look like. But what we have to realize is it might make more sense to take 2 years to get there, where they get a taste of it next year. For example, if part of our obvious formula is maybe a few less talks and a little more engagement, well, maybe our opinion of what's ideal is a certain ratio, and we decide that we only want to get halfway to that ratio this first year so that there's kind of proof of concept and people realize they want more of that. That's a question to ask. It doesn't mean it has to be done in steps, but I've learned that through different events, different communities that I've been brought in to help lead, where I'm brought in and they say, okay, do the full Monty, do the whole thing. And we end up backing off of that because I suggest, and they realize, hey, well, let's be thoughtful in the long run, not just do the ideal the first chance we have for it. Maybe, maybe not. In terms of the actual execution of the day, that's the easy part, right?
Yep.
Setting the context at the start of the day, helping them understand the value and the benefit of it. I'd probably start the day with an activity where they're connecting with each other. Literally, start the day with that. And the whole theater seating and how to manage that, again, that's the easy part. That's just physics and math and geometry. And it's just realizing that, okay, if they're seated the way they're seated, it's more likely that we'll have them have conversations in pairs or groups of 3. You can do groups of 4 with that kind of seating. Really, it's not that difficult, but bigger than that, it gets difficult. The other thing is that kind of auditorium, there's sound implications where it's actually easier to hear when you do bigger groups, 3, 4, 5 versus pairs. Just basic math. You group 400 people into pairs, half the room is talking. The decibels are louder than if they're in groups of 3, a third of the room's talking. So we've done this, and that stuff that's tactical, and that could get figured out. I love, Mo, the example you just gave. It's a great example of, okay, is there some frameworks that we might use for how they move through the day, right? Some basic conversations they have throughout the day. So that stuff, that's for us, that's the easy part. Getting buy-in, communicating it up front, I think that's the part that's easy to overlook, that's going to be really important. And then the simulcast, well, here's the good news. The simulcast, to me, that's easy. You just need another facilitator standing in that room. And because you'll probably have one live facilitator in the main room, one live facilitator in the simulcast. I have done live streaming of experiential events, and I've done it kind of the way that I think I heard Mo describe it. And going into it, I didn't feel good about it. Coming out of it, I didn't feel good about it, because I realized they're kind of watching us eat a meal that they don't get to eat. So after I did that was 2 years ago at Best Year Ever, I thought about it. How would I handle that? And really what you need is a third facilitator. If you want the streaming audience to also get a kind of up-leveled level of engagement, you'd have a third facilitator. And anytime you go to a break or guidance from a live facilitator, you have a third facilitator that's literally just standing right there on the stage, talking into a camera, saying, hey, for those of you at home, here's what you can do for the next 20 or 30 minutes. And part of what you could communicate in advance is if they're streaming in, if this even matters, but if you want to manage the experience of someone streaming in, you just encourage them in advance to try and watch this in groups of 2 or more. Try and have somebody else with you, because we're going to be giving you some experiential activities that you could participate in if you have another person. And the last thought is, if it's important to really think through it, you could still have a way for the streaming folks to be engaged, even if they're not with somebody else. It just turns into journaling, reflecting and journaling. That's it, right? So those are all practical things that are really not the hard part to figure out. I'm excited by seeing what could happen here. I think there could be magic in the room. And I started this all by saying, this is about configuring strengths. And Jeremy, you pointed this out. Sara, I know you know this better than any of us. What's beautiful about the TED audience is that attracts a group of people that are committed, that are engaged, that are intellectually fired up. So this whole way of convening people, they're already supercharged. So it could be really, really great. The last thing I'll add is something to consider would be, and this is just a part of the evolution, is having a workbook that helps to guide all of this. And even within the workbook, they're going to be meeting lots of new people. So that workbook becomes a valuable artifact that they leave with, where they're tracking notes from conversations. Because I think what could come of this, the biggest benefit could be the networking. And what's great is it's not loose networking where they're hopefully networking on their own. It's curated networking. Where you're ensuring that the networking is happening amidst meaningful conversations. I think that is going to be the big surprise. People walking away saying, "Oh, that's the best part." Before, we just sat next to each other and then we left, and maybe they connected, but now you're going to know it's going to be a little bit deeper. Okay, right, here's the other worldly idea. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about bringing this exact question. How could you evolve a TEDx agenda to include what we've learned as Leaf leaders to the entire Leaf community, and crowdsourcing all of our ideas and then combining them all to help create this solution here. And I like doing that. And it's not about TEDx Traverse City. It's about, well, here's this product called TEDx that we're all familiar with. Let's crowdsource ideas. I'm going to get all of our best ideas. Now, if Sara gets to be a beneficiary of that, great. But I like crowdsourcing it too, because I also like this being a potential solution that we could help any of you to offer to one of the 10,000 TEDx events that happen around the world. So that's the otherworldly idea. I'm going to stop.
Sounds amazing. I can't wait for TEDx 2018.
I know.
The community, we're going to be a very lucky community. That's for sure.
Well, folks, stay tuned. If you need to pee in a cup, pee in a mug.
I got to go.
All right. Don't tell us that. Hey, a little training. If you're ever not going to make it to something like a meeting or you have to go, just don't announce it. Don't publicize it.
I just want to say goodbye to you, though. I didn't want to leave.
It doesn't serve to say, oh, I'm not going to make it to that, or I got to go. It's just a little training for conveners. There's no benefit to announce whether you can make something. And I like that somebody just privately mentioned that they, all right. Deanna, we're going to talk to you real soon. Hey, Deanna, you have to jump off. But did you just deliver an engagement for Marriott?
I did. It was great. It was really wonderful. I learned so much through it. I wish we had no time, or I didn't create time to do a elevation call with you. So I had many learning experiences on the fly, but it was great.
Right.
Had lots of wonderful feedback. I think there's great potential for more there. So it was all wonderful.
So Deanna, our next co-elevation call, I want to do it. I want to start with you and focus it on your learnings in that event. Because I have a feeling from looking at your workbook and knowing you that it's going to be a big learning experience for this community. So let's make sure our next one is based on when you're available.
That sounds great. Yeah, yep, sounds great. Unfortunately, I'm booked until mid-December.
March?
So, yeah, really.
That's okay. Perfect. Deanna, thank you.
Right.
Jeremy, Sara. Oh, Jeremy's gone. We know that. Sara, thank you. I'm here.
You.
I am here, and let me see what my schedule says. I've got a call in about 15 minutes, so I could definitely hang for 10 more if there's anybody who wanted to get any coaching on anything, share any ideas, talk about leaf, fly, soar, air.
I just had one, sorry, and then I have to hop off too, but what should my follow-up be for TEDx? Or what can it be for us to further the discussion?
Yeah, that's easy. Well, I on behalf of FLI, have a stake in seeing it be successful. So let's just talk again really soon. Because
okay.
I really see this. If we can, and again, I say if because maybe we discover there's constraints and it can't be. Maybe you've already looked into all that.
I think we're going to be okay. I'm going to double check and go through the
Great.
The license.
Yeah. So I think we should have another call. I am going to extend to this community this question and just see what kind of ideas people want to generate. And we'll just keep talking about it because I want to see it work. So it'd be great. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing Jeremy and I to present today too. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what you're doing it's an example that every one of us can learn from. It's very straightforward, a lot that we could all learn from. So awesome. Hey, Steve, I see you put a comment in here. Do you want to share with us, whoever's still here, about this, a report or a document that you've created that you might be able to share with us?
Hey, sure. Good afternoon. So just on the topic of, I think capturing some of those high level themes and then setting it up for a future event or having something to go reference back to. I have a report out that we did after an event where we did a very quick kind of I guess call it sort of a crowdsourcing exercise to identify some different themes as a strategic planning initiative for an organization. And so we captured those in a document and provided them a little bit of a summary on some of the themes that emerged and some things they might do as a result of that. And it was a very good sort of positioning document for a future event or exercise. So I can post that in the Facebook community.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Super cool. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, open office hours here. Any other questions, comments, anything I can support anybody with? Anybody want to say hi? Shout outs? Thank our sponsors.
I got a quick question, John.
Go ahead, please, Jesse. Good to see you, buddy.
So good to see you too. This is really helpful. I took 3 pages of notes. So I have an opportunity to bring in what I'm doing in the recovery community with AI into a high school, an alternative high school. And they have 75% of their students are addicted to drugs. And it's pretty serious. So I went in yesterday and met with them, with the principal, and I told them what I did at Bonfire, and they loved it. And they're like, "Can you come in next week?" And I'm like, "Whoa, I didn't expect that." So I'm thinking about running an event next week using the same framework as I did for Bonfire Recovery Services in the high school setting. So this is an alternative high school. It's the students who have been kicked out of high schools around Boston area, all the toughest schools. And so it's going to be like kind of the most challenging students that have the most issues with drugs and alcohol. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It doesn't have to be on this call. I'm going to run it the same way I ran it at Bonfire, but I didn't know if there's any feedback you could give me with this.
Yeah. When is this event going to happen?
I'm waiting for an email back to know whether it's going to be late next week or the week after, but definitely in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, great. I would encourage you to connect with Jeremy, Brother James. Have you, he's been in 25 schools this year using AI, maybe 30 schools using AI, and a lot of them alternative schools. So you may have known that or maybe not, but
yep, I did. Yep.
Yeah, he could definitely give you a lot of insight into that environment that I wouldn't have.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Especially with it coming up so quick. I think just reach out. I'm certain he'll jump on a call with you. I think that'd be awesome.
Okay. Perfect.
You've got his shirt on after all. You've got
yeah. That's his shirt. Yes.
So that you were already embodying.
I already knew the answer. I just wanted to talk on the call. So I give that.
Hey, since you spoke, I'll give you a shout out. Congrats to Jesse. Those of you who weren't there, Jesse came up on stage at the Best You Ever Blueprint event and shared a little bit about his journey and his story from the very beginning all the way up through taking a huge risk and with his business and his career this year. And it was awesome. It was really, really well received. So congrats to you, Jesse. Thanks for being willing to courageously step up, man. It was really great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was an incredible experience. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, a couple announcements as few of you are still looking at me. On December 14th, we have an FLI Insight call, 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll record it, of course, but I'm going to give all of you everything I can that we're learning from some of our big client opportunities right now. We've got a company, Clark, that we're doing a summit for them end of January, and it's a strategic planning summit. And we just did a kickoff for them a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to walk all of you through the exact agenda of what we did in that kickoff, because that kickoff is run as a microcosm of the larger strategic planning summit, right? It's not like a different style of meeting. It's an AI style meeting. And I will tell you, there were some things that happened in that kickoff. The client, it surpassed what they were hoping for. In fact, they were fine admitting beforehand and afterwards that they had a lot of concerns. They weren't sure if this group was going to engage or get connected to a deeper sense of purpose the way they were hoping. And it blew them away. Within minutes of the start of the day, it went way beyond what they thought it would. And the whole day was literally, it was like playing an instrument and not missing a note for 9 hours. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about them. The whole thing. Now, I'll take some credit for why that happened, and I'll tell you what we did to make it happen. So a lot of it is planned and a lot of it's not planned, and you just hope you're making the right decisions. But I'm going to talk about that on December 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I've got some other things that we have going on at Fly. Did I tell you this at the beginning of the call today, that I was talking to BMW this morning? Did I tell you about this? So I had a call yesterday with the head of the autonomous driving, I don't even know how to say it, self-driving BMWs. So they've got 1,000 engineers working right now, day and night, to deliver a lineup of self-driving BMWs by the year 2021. And they ended up talking to me because they're trying to figure out how to tap into the collective wisdom of these engineers. And keep in mind, at least in their words, these are 1,000 of the smartest engineers on the planet working for BMW, creating self-driving cars. And what they told me is the reason they're talking to me is because they need to figure out how to get everybody connected to a deeper sense of purpose. They need to get everybody connected to working together in ways that are more effective in a high stress, highly complex, high stakes environment. And if you think about it, 1,000 really smart engineers who are ushering an iconic brand that's been around for over 100 years, BMW, into this whole new space of self-driving cars. I mean, this is really it's really a once in a lifetime situation for them as a company, right? It's some people argue it's a make or break deal if they can figure this out. And make or break, not in a bad way, but in a good way. You know, it could be a whole industry disruption thing. Not that they're the only ones, but being that they are an iconic brand, it's a big deal. So I was surprised. This call came out of nowhere. A guy found me on a podcast, and he said, "Hey, I've done a little bit of research, and I think appreciative inquiry is what we need to use for this team to tap into their best level of wisdom in order for us to actually solve this big challenge that we have." So I don't know if that'll turn into anything. It was a very interesting conversation. The entire video call was recorded. So depending on what unfolds, I'm going to see if at a later date I can get permission to let you watch that call. It was about an hour long. It was very enjoyable. It was me and this guy. He looked kind of like me. He has a couple of young kids. And as I was asking, and he did something really cool with Zoom that I'd never seen. I asked him about the organizational structure, and he goes, "Well, hold on, let me share my screen." And the screen was a white canvas, and he just starts drawing pictures, and he drew pictures of everything. And as he described it, he's describing an approach to leadership and I'm just drooling because I'm listening to him, and it's literally perfect for appreciative inquiry. It's based on the idea of leadership happening at the level of a team. And they don't have individual experts. They have teams that all have expertise. And he's describing it. We talked about AI, and we'll see what happens. So there might be a future call where I share about that. If you can learn something from it, great. Last thing here is just one more announcement on Leaf. We are going to fill up our next Leaf class probably this month. We have 60 to 80 people applying for 25 to 30 spots. We're not going to be accepting everyone who said they're interested. But if any of you know anybody that you think is a good candidate, we're always open to someone that knows somebody who's already in the community. We would move to the front of the line for obvious reasons. So just putting that out there. And then last thing, we have a meeting here at FLI headquarters this month. It's our whole collective FLI team. There's a couple folks from Leaf, Mike McCarthy and Jeff Bowman, who are going to be joining the meeting. And it's going to be a design meeting where we're working on the future of Leaf. We're also working on the future of FLI. I'm probably going to send a survey out to everyone in the Leaf community to give everybody a chance to give some input that can be brought into that particular meeting. There's going to be a lot of meetings like this in the future. This particular one, we're looking at the next year or two for Leaf. And I'll share with you right now that one of the things we're seeing is that the capstone session. So first of all, general comment, the trainings where we kick off a new class, we're going to continually invite folks who are graduates, or even if they just graduated the day before, to come through to join us with new trainees. So just planting that seed is an opportunity there for some of you who are in class 2. If you want to stay here a couple extra days to be with class 3, we're still figuring up what's the relationship there in terms of, is there a cost to cover some of the costs? How does that work? But that's one of the things we're ironing out. The other thing that we're doing is we are opening up the graduating class for prior graduates to come join that class. We're doing that because our first graduating class, we ran it like a mastermind session where everybody's just learning from each other. And a number of folks said, they said, how do we find a way to continue to come back to this kind of setting? There's nowhere else to go to get this LEAF specific training. So sharing that, and that if you want to put on your calendars, just to have it on your calendar, if you're on this call, you're probably, if you weren't in the first class, you were in the graduating class. So you're coming back April 23rd through the 25th. But if you want to put on the calendar the week of October 8th, we're going to back up the class 4 kickoff with class 3's graduation that week. And we will be creating a way for people in LEAF to come back to those graduating classes. And we'll allow those to get bigger and bigger, because the way that we're going to run them, there's no reason to not let more LEAF people be there to learn from each other. So we're pretty excited about that. I will also tell you that been having more and more conversations with folks in the broader appreciative inquiry community, because they're kind of hearing about and seeing what we're doing. And as we're doing that, we are getting more and more clarity on how what we are doing is quite different from how AI is being taught everywhere else. I have my own clarity on that, but we're actually sharpening our understanding of what we're doing and how it's different. And I won't talk too much more about that. I won't talk more about that right now. But what's really exciting is we're getting more and more certainty around how unique what we're doing is. Because the other AI certifications, to put it very, very simply, and it's spelled out on their own advertisements, really all they're doing is they cover AI theory and they teach the 4D cycle. And they encourage people to move people through this 4D cycle. And what's interesting is there's folks who are very prominent in the AI community who have come to me and they've said, yeah, what we're trying to figure out is how to move away from the 4D cycle and teach it as this modular thing that can just be brought in and used everywhere. And then they hear from one of you about what we're doing and they're like, oh my gosh, that's actually what you started with. So it's some really interesting conversations there. We actually have, I won't say the name of the school or who it's with because I want to wait until they make it official, but we have some folks that are very prominent in the AI community that are asking to come through our next certification because they're realizing we've already solved the thing that they want to solve with their certification. So it all makes it very interesting. And anyone who wants could come to our certification. There is no competition. There is no competition, not when the opportunity is this big. An opportunity of this size, we just need more and more people to be learning how to lead in this way. So, and we see that to be proven out again and again. All right, questions, comments? Sharice is eating. I finished eating. Hey, take care, everybody. We'll talk to y'all real soon. Bye-bye.